after 9/11 at Roosevelt University, someone, I forgot, Christine, was it you?
No, it was my then counterpart,
Pat, called me up at Roosevelt and wanted to know if NATO could come to Roosevelt University, and I said, of course. And we had these two dapper English guys come around, and almost looked like Masterpiece Theater for a while, but it was really impressive, and we had a very nice crowd of students after the terrible events of 9/11. And then Christine called me several months ago and said they'd like to come back. They're coming back to Chicago. Would we host them? And some of you Roosevelt grads know that when it's summertime in the city, Roosevelt University could be used for echo chamber music, rather empty. So I said, let's have it at the City Club. And so I welcome all of you here today. I think it's going to be tremendous. And and since Jay's not here, you're all important. Make off I just introduced all of you. Over. Our president likes to go around introducing people with the go-to guy and all that kind of stuff. But we'll eschew that today because we have two very important guests. It is my pleasure to introduce Commander Alfredo Rackauskas. I can say it. You merry Lithuanian girl. Rackauskas is like Smith. And Lieutenant Commander Stephen Harper, who are going to make the presentation. And Kathy, if you want to watch us, please, feel free. Join us. Let's give them a great round of applause. Alf Rackauskas, Steve Harper. Whatever you guys want to do, it's yours.
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Commander Ed Rackauskas, and this is Lieutenant Commander Steve Harper with me. We're here to talk to you a little bit about NATO, what NATO has been doing lately, and give you a little insight as to what NATO is planning on doing in the future. Now, this is not our regular duties. We're both active duty naval officers. I work as a commander of a logistics depot for NATO, and Steve works in logistics also. We had a little accident yesterday with our computer system. It crashed. We got the blue screen of death, and unfortunately we have to go to our backup presentation, which is manual. So please bear with us. We will give you a brief presentation and then follow that up with a question and answers period. Okay? Quick background on NATO. NATO is an organization that's been remarkably successful for the past 54 years, and one that continues to attract new members. We'd like to explain a little bit about NATO itself, the challenges that we face right now, and how do we intend on tackling the future. First of all, we'd like to cover a little bit of background about NATO, and we will cover the topics of the history of NATO, the role of NATO, how NATO works, a little bit about how NATO is evolving now that the Cold War is over, some of NATO's current operations, and the future of NATO. The advent of globalization has meant that there appears to be much more interdependence of the states, not only in economic and political aspects, but also in terms of stability and security. And NATO has played a vital role in this for the past 54 years.
And at this time, just a little background about myself. Again, good morning. I am Lieutenant Commander Stephen Harper. I was stationed on the USS Tennessee, SSBN Trident submarine before I came here. I've been here at NATO for about 2 years now. NATO, what does that stand? You know, Captain, NATO or any military organization, it's not official until you have actually an acronym that goes along with it. So what NATO does not stand for is not anything after 2 o'clock. Doesn't stand for needs alcohol to operate. What NATO does stand for is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. We were founded, NATO, we were founded by the Washington Treaty in 1949. At the time, we invited Belgium, Denmark, Italy, Luxembourg, Norway, United Kingdom, Canada, France, Iceland, the Netherlands, Portugal, and us, United States. And because of that coalition, we had a threat, if you will, a threat-driven organization. Again, we were founded right here in San Francisco, well, not here, but here in the U.S. in San Francisco. And after the aftermath of World War II, we found ourselves really finding a defiance on why we needed to exist. Later in the years, we invited also Greece, Turkey, and Germany, as well as Spain, into the organization. However, we did lose the spirit of France. France still has their presence known in NATO, but more of a political organization and not necessarily a military organization. And for you intel guys, don't look at me too, I think we do have some intelligence folks here as reservists as well, so don't throw darts up here just yet. Later on, the commander is going to talk about some other countries that we have invited into the organization, into NATO. Article 5. As we saw, that article meaning one attack against one country is an attack against all. And we saw that article really raised for the first time in the events of 9/11. We also have Article 4, which we've seen in the current events with Turkey. And it's pretty much saying that a nation requests consultation before taking any action. That's what we've seen in Iraq. And this is where the slideshow will come in beautifully, but since it does, I'm going to try to explain the organization to you as best I can. So let me see if I can paint the best picture for you. The NAC, like I said, if it doesn't have an acronym, it doesn't exist in NATO. The NAC, the North Atlantic Council, is made up of 19 nations, as I've just spoken of. Each member or each country has an ambassador that sits at a table there in Brussels. The chairman is always a European, and we've seen that chairman now, Lord Robertson, who we just invited to our transformation, again, the commander to speak on. But he is our ambassador of, or sits over, the actual NAC itself. It's based on a consensus. Therefore, all decisions must be considered as a group, and each nation has an equal weight. However, NATO is a political organization with 19 separate nations of sovereignty. However, that organization exists through a military strength, and the military strength is the military committee, providing advice, military advice to the NAC. The chairman now is a European, who was a German general, and its sub-commands are two strategic commands. SAC, geez, again, all these acronyms. SAC, Supreme Allied Commander Transformation, who is now under the command of Admiral Jim Bassiani, who is a U.S. four-star admiral here in the United States. He took command of June 19, 2003, and as well as here in the United States, we have another counterpart, a four-star general at SAC Europe, over in Europe. Headquarters in Mons, Belgium, and is under the command of a Marine Corps General, General Jones. Just a word about France. Like I said, France has a political stance, but not necessarily can bring or will bring military personnel into an operation. What are some of our new risks? Now that the Cold War is over, we have new threats, new responses that NATO responds to. Some of those that we've seen in current events: proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, ultra-nationalism, religious groups, ethnic disputes, territorial conflict, and yes, as we've seen, terrorism. So I guess in the conclusion of that, NATO focus is on the center of gravity is for security and stability, not only here in the U.S., but as well as in Europe. Today, like I said, I've spoken on how NATO pretty much exists. It does this through consultation and cooperation. We found that our relationships with countries, not only in Europe, or even as far as in North America, we've seen that this partnership does exist. We have 27 countries who are in partnership for peace. They have stressed their interest in joining NATO, however, have not accepted a formal invitation, if you will, to NATO. As I said, we have 7 countries who are now will be inducted, if you will, into NATO, and the commander will speak on those in a little bit. But we also have countries who are interested in joining NATO: Albania, Macedonia, and Croatia. How does this exist? We call it, again, here's another acronym for you, so if you're keeping up, I think I'm up to 4 or 5. So here's a 5th one: MAP. Membership Action Plan. Each country must show an interest in joining the Union through a political means. Each nation must demonstrate a political stability, the acceptance of democratic freedom, as well as functioning in a free market economy, as well as willing to share some of the burdens dealing with common risk and threats. I told you that not every nation needs a military force to join the military, join NATO, as we've seen in Iceland and Luxembourg, whose military is not obsolete, but is very, very limited. I spoke on the Soviet Union or the Cold War, and we've seen recently in NATO the Soviet or the Russian summit that took place in May 28, 2002. We call it the Action Plan +1, where NATO actually went out and sought out its adversary and asked them or invited them to come along aside with us. So Russia now brings a strong force, not actually joining the Union or NATO, but still makes a presence known. NATO. Once again, NATO is a political alliance with a military focus. The EU, the European Union, is a political union with the economic focus. These countries are members, some countries are members of NATO, however, they're not part of the EU, and vice versa, which can cause a conflict of interest. Within the security architect of NATO, we have a Council of Europe, the oldest union of 44 nations with the interacting government that its purpose and aim is to protect human rights, democratic, and rules of law. The EAPC, that's the 6th one I think I'm up to, European Atlantic Partnership Council, is multilateral form of NATO member and partner countries on a regular basis meet to discuss political and security relation issues. In this forms 46 members, again the 19 nations that we have currently, and the 27 nations of Partnership for Peace. The OSCE, Organization Security and Cooperation in Europe. Again, its primary instrumental focus is for early warning, conflict prevention, crisis management, and post-conflict rehabilitation within Europe. So the primary advantages of this is transparency, defense spending, consultation again and cooperation in disciplinary nations. The EU Summit, the autonomy. The EU autonomy, its capability to decide and launch or even conduct EU-led military operations within Petersburg task spectrum, which pretty much focuses in on humanitarian aids and things of peacekeeping missions. The headline of this is by 2003, I think we said later on this year, we want to have the ability, it's the EU, want to have the ability to deploy 6,000 personnel equaling 15 brigades with C2, command and control, intelligence, and logistics into anywhere that we see fit within 60 days and have the sustainability for 1 year. The European Security Defense Identity. Pretty much it is the decision-making autonomy by the EU to avoid duplication of NATO and competition. Therefore, each nation, we call it singularity. Each nation has one set of forces to use those forces as a sovereignty to decide where those forces will be used. Balancing as well as applying and to participate into which focus group. Separability, but not separate, has a capability of bringing balance to the organization. We have also in the EU rapid reaction forces, which also correlates within NATO. So those same forces that are used in the EU can also be used for national missions, NATO missions, as well as EU missions. Non-Article 5 operations at the lower spectrum can be used as for humanitarian assistance, disaster relief operations, as well as peacekeeping missions. Some of the operations that have existed recently, one of the main interests that we saw back in 1995 in the Balkans, where NATO committed itself or committed troops not only into Kosovo, Macedonia, and Albania, but currently we have 12,000 troops operating in Bosnia under stabilization forces, as well as 23,000 troops in Kosovo. Small missions under Macedonia, we call it Task Force Fox, which handed over EU operations in April 2003. Again, we seen how does NATO even involve itself with terrorism, as I spoke on recently? Well, after the acts of 9/11, NATO invoked Article 5, and again, going back to that, one attack against one is attack against all. And we've seen that article led to NATO operations right here in the U.S., where we had AWACS surveillance planes flying over the U.S., operating in U.S. airspaces from October 2001 until May 2002. This allowed U.S. forces to deploy elsewhere while Allied forces backfill some of the operations here in the U.S. It also helped us redeploy naval forces in the Mediterranean to assist in inspection of merchant ships as well. Some of our current operations, as we've seen, not only in Afghanistan but here in Iraq, NATO as a nation and as an organization did not deploy, if you will, forces. I shouldn't say forces. It did make contributions, or it is making contributions, as in 14 out of the 19 member nations have deployed troops in Afghanistan. And as we speak, we have the headquarters in Kabul is operated and providing operations under Germany and Netherlands as the headquarters. The current situation in Iraq now, again, NATO is not formally involved in any planning to a possible attack Iraq. However, NATO has taken position to fully support operation in disarming Iraq. There are, of course, deep and continuing disagreements within the UN, as we've seen, over many means of disarming Saddam Hussein, but not only not to the ends, but the means to do so. In case with Turkey, with requesting consultation under Article 4 over a potential threat to its boundaries, this deployment was a NATO force that after 2 weeks of difficulty debate at the NAC, or the NATO, North Atlantic Council, the disputes over timing was not of substance, but the debate wasn't over how, but it was the debate of when. At this time, I'm going to turn the podium back over to Commander Rackauskas, and he'll talk to us about the Prague Summit.
A little bit about what's going on right now and what's scheduled to happen in the future with NATO. NATO's looking at a couple of key aspects. The aspect of enlargement, NATO transformation itself, and they're very concerned about terrorism and weapons of mass destruction. There was a recent summit of heads of state in Prague last November. This was a very important summit because not only did we decide to enlarge NATO, inviting 7 new member nations to join NATO, NATO took a real hard look at what its future roles and missions was going to be. As you all know, NATO was set up to defend against the possibility of the Warsaw Pact attacking any of the member nations. Well, with that challenge diminished now, NATO has to reorganize itself and figure out what its true meaning is going to be in the future. Most importantly, Russia is no longer an adversary. Now they're working more as an ally in many aspects. They're concerned about terrorism and weapons of mass destruction, as the rest of the NATO nations are. During the Cold War, our posture was to prepare for a massive force to counter any attack to any of the alliance member nations. Our posture was defensive and reactive and pointed towards one known enemy. Our command structure was set up in such a way where we had 2 strategic headquarters. The strategic headquarter in Europe was primarily aimed towards land combat and land forces, whereas the strategic command located in Norfolk, Virginia, which is the headquarters we report to, was more maritime focused in protecting the sea lanes of the Atlantic and protecting the Mediterranean. That organization structure worked fine during the Cold War, but it's kind of obsolete in modern day. So that's one of the reasons why NATO took a look at transformation and what needed to be done in order to make NATO more relevant for the 21st century. Tomorrow we need to be more proactive, we need to be expeditionary in nature, and our warfare tactics need to be more network oriented, and there has to be more integration of all the forces. NATO has to become more joint in tactics and in the way it thinks, rather than having allies that operate at different levels of capability. Everybody should be at a more equal footing so we can operate more efficiently. One of the biggest changes that the U.S. forces are doing right now is we're becoming more expeditionary in nature. As you may have recently witnessed in Iraq, our forces moved in very quickly and covered a rather large amount of territory in a very short period of time. In a way, that's a bit of a revolution in military tactics and in way of doing business. It's somewhat unconventional to what the military used to operate under. The other areas where NATO needs to transform itself, it has to streamline its command structure. Right now there are too many layers of command and control, and there's redundancy in the chain of command. So the process of getting anything approved through the NATO system is very burdensome and very complicated. And things can get bogged down in committees for an infinite period of time, so it becomes an inefficient organization. One of the things that NATO is trying to do right now is to streamline that command structure and make it more relevant for the future. NATO is also looking at forming a response force, NATO response force that will be a rapid response force to be able to tackle any situations that arise within its boundaries and other areas of interest. Other areas of interest which are non-traditional places for NATO to be involved, such as the North Africa, possibly Asia, areas that definitely have an interest, NATO has an interest in, but have not been traditionally areas where they focused attention. Thirdly, there's a commitment to improve NATO capabilities. One of the things that was discussed during the Prague summit is that there's a terrible transatlantic gap in capabilities between the U.S. military and our European allies. Traditionally, the U.S. has maintained a somewhat steady funding of materials and improvements in our capabilities, while our allies have tended to take some of that money that was originally programmed for defense spending and apply it to other areas of their economy. That has led to a tremendous gap in capabilities that NATO now realizes and they want to try to close. It makes it very hard for us to work with some of our NATO counterparts when their technology is decades old and incapable of talking with our technology. So what do we transform in the coming years? We're going to transform the command and control of the forces. We're going to transform the procedures that we operate under, our doctrine and policies, and our capabilities. We're going to improve the equipment, the material, and facilities that NATO operates with. The command that we represent is Allied Command Transformation. It's a newly formed command, as Lieutenant Commander Harper mentioned. It's only been officially around since June of this year. It has a major charter to work with. Its main mission is one of leading transformation within the alliance and to align the capabilities of the alliance with U.S. capabilities. It is intended to bring intellectual rigor to the process, and it will also stimulate the transformation in the national forces of the alliance members. We're going to ensure the infusion of research and technology and address shortfalls within the capabilities of the member nations. One of the things that our organization is going to be in charge of is all the NATO schools and colleges, and making sure that our alliance members all get the same level of training, and wherever it's compatible, you know, they attend some of the same schools that the U.S. forces get an opportunity to attend. We intend on developing an effective mechanism for combining national efforts so we're able to deploy more efficiently and with combined forces. And one of the big issues within the U.S. military is the use of network-centric warfare. It's what this is in a nutshell is it means that the thinking, the training, and exercising together of all our forces. The U.S. military, like most militaries in the world, were traditionally stovepiped, where you had Army, Navy, Air Force. Each service had its own customs, traditions, and mode of operating. And very rarely did you combine the forces in a truly joint effort where everybody operated under similar rules of engagement and everything else. As our military transforms, we want to create a seamless interaction between the services so we can operate more efficiently. And that's one of the things that NATO wants to get involved with also. The five main domains that Allied Command Transformation is going to get engaged in the coming years are shaping the capabilities and the concepts, policies, and interoperability of our forces, the requirements and capability planning and implementation, joint and combined future capabilities research and technology, joint experimentation, and joint education and training. NATO has several centers located throughout Europe that are involved in this effort. We have a joint warfare center, which will be the implementing agent. They will be responsible for training the headquarters staff and the various forces. We also have a joint force training center, which will be supporting both the strategic commands and they'll deliver more in the way of training and validation and testing of the concepts, development, and the experimentation. There's also going to be a joint analysis lessons learned center that will compile data and look at weaknesses within the structures and try to make things more relevant and more and correct deficiencies, basically. Just a couple of things about NATO in 2003 and beyond. NATO will continue to play an important role for the security and stability of the alliance's areas of interest. It will most likely play a more important global role in conducting out-of-area operations, such as we see right now with the mission in Afghanistan. Even though NATO has not publicly come out yet and said whether or not they're going to be involved in any future peacekeeping or nation building in Iraq, those issues are being discussed at higher levels, and we may see some outcome in the future. I can't say for sure if we are or not, but they're being discussed. The peace support activities will continue, and it will take a great deal of effort of all the member nations. As we mentioned, NATO's been around for 54 years. The fact that so many nations are still willing to join NATO and be a part of the alliance says a lot for itself. In my particular case, I've been in the U.S. Navy for 24 years. It's only been the last 2 years that I've been directly involved with NATO. But early on, I knew that we had a very serious commitment to the NATO alliance, and that's something that I think every member of the U.S. service realizes and is ready to work with the allies. Thank you very much for your attention, and at this time we would like to entertain any questions you might have. Yes, sir.
What NATO countries are currently participating in operations in Afghanistan and Iraq?
I can mention a few of them right off the top of my head. There's Germany, Belgium, Italy. I believe the French are doing some log support, logistics support. The UK, US. Poland is heavily involved. Netherlands. We have about 14 out of the 19 nations are providing some level of support. A lot of that support is on a bilateral relationship with the U.S. rather than a NATO umbrella. Although NATO is providing the command and control for the overall operation right now.
And sir, to just back up the command, it doesn't necessarily mean putting troops on the ground or planes in the air. It can also mean the financial contribution as well. So, like I mentioned earlier, Luxembourg and Iceland, you know, so other contributions are being made to that.
Yes, sir. NATO's focus prior to the fall of the Berlin Wall was that to protect Europe from an invasion from the east. It was very effective in the command structure that was in place up until that point. The forces that were available seemed to be appropriate for the time. Something happened after the fall of the Berlin Wall. There was a pause, per se, within Europe and elsewhere. We thought that peace had been achieved and everybody wanted to take a wait-and-see attitude. And at that point, a lot of the nations started to decrease their spending, and they wanted to take in some of that peace dividend, and that's where things sort of fell behind. Now, for the U.S., we continue to modernize and try to maintain ourselves relevant with our defense initiatives, and that's where the gap started to grow. Yes, sir.
What is the budget of NATO? How is it funded? The countries contribute in relationship to their size, their commitment to NATO.
Exactly. The overall budget of NATO, they operate in a calendar fiscal year. It's roughly equivalent to about $500 million. It's on a per a fair share basis based on national GDP. And there's a formula that was agreed upon many years ago, and the nations follow that. The current U.S. contribution is roughly a quarter of the NATO budget. Yes, sir.
Could you say something about the discussions in Europe about a joint military policy with the EU and how that may affect the future of NATO?
I'm not prepared to discuss that right now, sir, but we'll be glad to take your name and get back to you with, there are policy documents and stuff that address that subject specifically. Yes, ma'am.
How are relationships from within NATO impacted by the disagreement in the UN over the invasion of Iraq?
Very good question. NATO has a very strong alliance, and friends can disagree on issues and carry on. The overall future of the alliance is more important than individual issues that might bring some tension upon allies.
Is that a U.S. settlement or generally a shared settlement?
Well, it's not something we discuss in uniform with our counterparts, but overall, it's a sentiment that we all belong to the same alliance. We have a common purpose, so we try to just get over the issues that are political in nature and move on. It's not something we really get involved in at our level.
Military is military, political is political.
Exactly. Exactly. Yes, sir.
Ms. Andrew, my question is, obviously sometimes, I'm curious, bureaucracies sometimes do not always die even though they accomplish their goal. It seems that we won the Cold War. Why at that time didn't we say, let's wrap it up, do we still need NATO, rather than maybe they need a new organization later on, develop something perhaps more focused to life after the Cold War? Because, I'm sorry to regard this a little unwieldy. Also talking about the disparities in defense funding, we're such on a high level and we maintain a lot of troops in Europe. Are we essentially subsidizing European defense, which might put us at an economic disadvantage? I'm not saying be an isolationist. What I'm saying is that one of the factors? If we have a lot of troops on the front lines, are we indirectly subsidizing the European defense structure so they can put more money perhaps into social programs than we can?
Very good question. I would say that there's, in any decision to employ security forces, there are political reasons why we do it. There's economic reasons, obviously. Our trading partners are, stability in Europe is important for stability in the U.S. And I think there's underlying interests there that make us, contribute to that stability. Beyond that, I really can't say. There is a certain mindset, perhaps, that the U.S. provides a greater share than some of the other nations. But I think we're ultimately acting upon our interests, our national interests. Do you have anything else? Yes, sir.
I think it was Lieutenant Commander Harper mentioned that possibility of NATO becoming more directly involved in Iraq in terms of either helping to disarm or the search for these weapons of mass destruction. Currently, I believe other than 13,000 British troops, all of the troops involved in Iraq are United States personnel. If this were to occur, how would this come about? Would the United States government approach NATO? Would our member in NATO propose it to the other members? And you described as cumbersome bureaucracy. Is same time use terms like rapid response. How quickly or how long would it take for this to occur if someone suggested that NATO commit actual personnel rather than good wishes, money, etc. to Iraq?
That's a good question, sir, and I don't have an exact answer for you. It's a very lengthy bureaucratic process that has to be agreed upon. There are agreements that can be made on a bilateral basis between the U.S. and NATO member nations, and those occur rather quickly. Trying to get the NATO umbrella over any support, that's a different process, and that's the one that becomes very cumbersome. I can't give you an exact timeline. I know that there's consultations going on right now, but what the outcome of those consultations will be, I have no idea.
Thank you.
Sir. Yes, sir. Or ma'am, I'm sorry.
Air Force Reserve. Just got a question for you on your education and training program.
Yes.
Wondering if there's any initiative from NATO to pull together the efforts such as the Air Force has developed the Air Force Joint Professional Military Education Certification Program to elevate the understanding of joint services between Air Force, Army, Navy, and Marines. Is there any effort from NATO to pull together those efforts from each service to put that all under your roof?
I think she's talking about the JPME class, but I haven't heard anything come
Okay.
up.
That's something that will be looked at by the new organization once they combine all the universities and training courses under one strategic command. But I don't think they've gotten as far as coming up with, a big plan of bringing everything in. Right now, the U.S. Universities, military universities, allow foreign students from NATO countries to attend courses on a joint professional military education program basis. And at the same time, American officers get a chance to attend NATO schools, NATO University in Rome. If that's going to be expanded, I really can't say at this point. I'm not. I'm sorry?
I'm for hire.
Hi. Yes, sir.
The United States has given a lot of thought, time, and money to homeland security.
Yes.
Is there equivalent or any equivalent thought, time, and money going on in Europe? So is there any relationship between that process, between that kind of process and NATO?
My personal observations are that there is a great deal of interest in that subject in Europe. In recent months, I've noticed a lot more security in my travels to Europe. There is a lot more focus in that area. I think they realize that a 9/11 could occur at any time, any place, and all the nations are more vigilant of what's going on within their borders. That's just my personal observation, and I can comment on.
And speaking on that, earlier in my pitch, remember I said the readiness forces that should be ready sometime later on in 2003. We are looking into that as far as being able to deploy troops at a spur of the moment into, I call it, if you will, a hot zone, to put those troops in that area and to be able to sustain them for at least 60 days up to a year. So that is being looked at, because the original union of 19 nations coming together, it's almost like having cats, coming together, put them in one pot and they just fly. So we're trying to bring those cats back together to be able to respond more quickly, to be, again, I guess, to have proactive measures instead of reactive measures.
Yes, sir.
Time for one more question because we're in overtime.
Okay. Yes, sir.
The United States has developed unparalleled military technology. Would you be able to indicate how much of that might be shared with NATO?
Technology transfer is very closely governed by laws and treaties that we have with allied nations. there's individual circumstances for each type of weapon system. There is a lot of technology that is shared, that's co-produced by U.S. and European firms. There is sharing of technology. I can't give you specifics on, you know, exactly what the cutoff level would be. It depends on the system and, you know, what the actual technology is. But there is a lot of cooperation with.
We're looking at the word Commander said inoperability, being able to put our tank, a U.S. tank, next door to a German tank, so those two can act soul by soul. If we need a repair part off of a U.S. tank, to be able to correlate that to a whatever other foreign nation tank or asset, if you will. So trying to speed up that process. So that word inoperability is being looked at.
Young man, to close.
As the United States is increasingly interested in maintaining political stability through covert means, I was curious what the relationship is amongst the intelligence communities of NATO.
You guys thought it'd be a walk in the park, eh?
Chicago's a tough town.
Yeah.
Welcome back home.
All I can say about that matter is that there is close cooperation among, you know, various agencies, but it's something that's way above our level of involvement. There are national agencies that talk to each other, and there are elements that you know, deal with that subject, but we're not privy to it. I'm sorry.
Through the United States intelligence community?
I'm sorry?
Is that more a function of the networking that's evolving outside of the United States?
I would say so, yes.
How about a nice round of applause for our guest? We have members, by the way, any military ethics could certainly stand the gifts we're about to give you. A one-year membership for each of you with the City Club of Chicago. And Commander Rackauskas, when you come back to Chicago, next time you remember the City Club, an official coffee mug. This will make all those people envious that you were at the City Club, and they'll be shocked. And you probably may have to answer some national security questions of how you got those. On behalf of everybody in the City Club, we're very happy that you were here. Again, Christine, thank you for calling me, and meeting is adjourned.
Thank you very much.
Good job.